Morning.
Let's call this meeting to order with a quick roll call. Mr. Nabholz.
Here.
Mr. Fisher. Ms. Pacell.
Here.
Mr. Skoukis.
Here.
All right. Stand for a moment of silence, please. Leonard, would you mind leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. May I have a motion, please, to consider approving the agenda for this meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. We all received the minutes from the September 2021 meeting. If I can have a motion to consider approving those minutes.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. All right, move over to the monthly reports.
Sure. So just in full disclosure, I want to leave the mask on. I had a bit of a cough over the weekend. Not COVID. You're allowed to be sick without COVID, in case everybody forgot. So I'm gonna leave the mask on. So to date, our revenues are up 995,000 and our expenses are up 1.1 million for a net decrease of about 160,000. Of the decrease, 216,000 or 20% of it's due to transfer of capital. As we talk about every month, in 2020, the Board of Supervisors put a freeze on capital, which is the reason for the increase this year. So moving on to our revenues are up, or I'm sorry, our real estate taxes are up approximately $80,000 compared to 2020. As of the end of September, there's still about $113,000 left to collect in the general fund compared to $191,000 in 2020. Going based off previous year's histories, we usually submit about $50,000 to $60,000 to the county every year in taxes that haven't been collected. So that would leave about $60,000 left to collect this year. The other main increase you're going to see is in other taxes with an increase of approximately $600,000. Although we're seeing a slight decrease in LST tax, it's actually catching up where we were in 2020. On the other hand, real estate transfer tax, as everybody knows, the real estate market is booming at the moment. Not only the number of houses that are being sold, but actually the price of them as well. This is being seen all across the county that people's real estate taxes are up. We usually see about $70,000 a month on average in transfer tax a year. We're somewhere closer to 90 to 100 this year. In addition, the mainline health building transferred, that was about $400,000 in additional. And although we're not seeing it on this report, we'll talk about it next month. The apartment building over on Cornerstone, what's it called now?
Called this station in Newtown Square. It used to be the App Apartments.
They sold, and we got another approximately $117,000 from that sale as well. So although you're seeing a big skew in real estate transfer tax, it's going to get
Do you
better, better or worse.
Do
I
you
don't know.
track the real estate transfer tax? Do you track the difference between new construction versus resale?
We have not, and you know, it is something that we've talked about because like if we really start thinking,
That's what I'm doing forward look.
we had two major Toll Brother projects going on at the same time. Plus, we had the Rockwell units that were being sold over at the Ellis Preserve, and both of those projects, I believe, are all three of those projects, I believe, now are completely sold out. It's really just a matter of delivering the homes, and Toll Brothers has shared with me that all of their homes will be delivered by the end of the year. So
End of this year.
end of this year.
Okay.
My guess is Rockwell will be like 98% of their homes will be delivered by the end of the year. They have maybe there'll be 4 that won't be, and that'll be a little less than 98%, but they're really going to be very close as well. We do have 60 townhomes that Rockwell's going to do in the what is phase 2 of the Ellis Preserve. That is, my understanding, they're actually already have commitments on those. It will not surprise me to see those sell out very quickly. Well, I'm sorry, thank you. Sorry about that. Do I need to go back?
I think it picked up.
Okay, I just realized that I wasn't being picked up for the recording. So anyway, when I say that, it is a concern that we have in that next year, I anticipate us potentially seeing a decline.
Well, yeah,
In that
what's
area.
expected recurring versus what's
Right.
new.
What's new?
Yeah, so I also contacted the county to try to get reports
Yeah.
from them.
No help.
They handed over something
Yeah.
archaic. I didn't even really know what kind of file it was, to be honest with you.
You'd have to sit there and plot, what is the new street address that we never had?
Yeah, we could go back and take the information that they gave us, and we can pull it out. It's just going to be, it's going to be a fairly time consuming exercise. We are going to need to take a look at that. We have an idea. When you start looking at over the last 7 years, we've sold somewhere around 450 homes in the Lissitor subdivision, and then another 76 in Ellis, and of the carriage homes, and then the stacked townhomes was another, I think, 60. So, it's not hard to start pulling out those numbers, and that's not counting the infill that we've done. So, we can kind of pull back and see where that was, but it's going to take a little bit because the reports don't come in that way. We have to go back and pull it by street.
Yeah, the reports, and all they could give me a PDF. So when I try to convert the PDFs to Excel, it doesn't like it, and it would just be a lot of manual input. But it is something that we do need to start tracking. So moving on, interest, as I spoke about at the Board of Supervisors meeting, interest is way down. There's little we can do to control it, but the one thing that we can do in 2022 is look into some other investment options, like CDs or something, to try to combat the insanely low interest rate that we're getting in our checking account at this point. So that's something that we're going to be looking forward in 2022. Other financing sources, you'll see an increase of 182,000. The primary increase to this, as I spoke about last month, is the reimbursement to the school resource officer. They put more hours in this year than they did last year. Therefore, we received a bigger reimbursement from the school district. The board has asked me to go back and speak with Joe Driscoll over the school district about getting some reimbursement for when the officer was not over at the school because of COVID closures. And I realized that I have not heard back from Joe since I sent that email, so I will follow up with him.
I was just about to ask you that. And just so this finance committee is aware what the reason. So last year when the schools shut down, the school resource officer was obviously not in the buildings. So he was back on the streets. However, the board's position, and correct me if I'm phrasing this incorrectly there, Stephen, is that we entered into a contract with the school district whereby they were going to provide us X amount of dollars for the officer. So we view that as a contractual obligation that despite the fact that the students weren't in there, it was an agreement that nonetheless was signed by the two parties. We do not think, obviously we will pay it, but we do not think that we should be out that money, and have asked Rich to go back to the school district to secure those funds.
Yeah, and it does make sense because that officer was hired. I shouldn't say that officer. That officer happens to be somebody who's been on the department a long time, but we hired an officer for that purpose, and so we had not anticipated budgeting those dollars on our end. We only did it because the school district asked us. to have that officer. So, you know, we agreed to pick up the cost of the officer during the summer because in order to have him on the contract, under our contract, that was one of the things we had to do, but we didn't really agree to have, we weren't hiring an extra officer at that time for ourselves. So.
So moving on, the next major increase you're going to see in revenues is going to be for public safety. It's up about $92,000. This is primarily permit revenue. In May of 2021, we received a permit for the apartments of about $775,000. This is about 57% of all the permit revenue that we've collected. Although that is a large permit, 775,000, you can see that we're only up 92,000, and that's because we received a similar size permit back in 2020. So moving on to our expenses, like I stated before, we're up about $1.1 million, but 20% of this is capital related. The other major increase you're going to see is in debt service. That's up about $507,000. This is due to the duplicate loan payment in 2020, 2021. In 2020, we took a borrowing that the first principal payment was in 2021. That's your $506,000. Overall, the only other major increase you're going to see is in operating expenses. The operating expenses, it's up in many different departments just because there's more activities going on this year than there were last year. There's kind of I don't want to say a spending freeze, but less activities going on just because of COVID. Another major increase is going to be because of winter events. We had some early winter events in 2021 that we did not have in 2020. But overall, your expenses are up 1.1 million, with the two primary being your debt service and your capital expenses. And I will open it up for questions if anybody has any.
I just had a comment that on the interest point that you noted, I've seen people entering into these laddering CDs as an alternative because they're sort of safe in the, and they, you know, you can liquidate them in series instead of putting in a big amount and then it being tied up for a
Typically,
while.
when I looked at, we look at CDs from time to time anyhow, but over the last 2 years, 3 years, you were getting as much money in your savings account as you were putting it into a CD. And so it didn't make sense to lock up the money. But when I did money management in Phoenixville and we were using CDs quite extensively, I always laddered them because I always had them coming due at different times of the year, not knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we had some coming due almost like every month or every other month,
Yeah.
so that I always had a cash flow available for us, and we would do the same thing here.
Yeah, and it gives you a little negotiating power if you can put more in,
Yes.
but at the same time, you can liquidate them
Yeah.
when you need it.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of times I just rolled them back over, but I like to have that play in
The option.
the
Yeah.
options.
Mhm.
I have a question, going back to that school resource officer.
Mhm.
How does that exactly work? We just bill them, right? And are you saying that we bill them and they refuse to pay and now you have to have a discussion, or why are?
Well, we actually bill them typically typically bill them by how the officer was used. We have kind of the agreement, but it is so much per semester, and that's what we need to go back and just work with. So
It's a fixed fee per semester?
no, it's based on, there's a few variables in the contract based on what the officer's doing. So we just have to back out those variables that obviously he wasn't doing. You know, like if he worked a sporting event, that's extra hours, that's billed separately, those kind of things. And so, but we can go back to the contract and bill. We should bill what it was.
Well, my question is why are you negotiating with the school district as opposed to just sending them a bill and saying, pay it?
That's a good point.
The short conversation that I had is the school district said you guys were utilizing them, we weren't.
Yeah, but I think we just bill them and we'll have the conversation. I think that's a good point.
We have you here.
Typically, the school district just wrote us the check. We didn't even have to bill. But they didn't in this case. I think it is a good point. We'll just go ahead and bill and let them figure it out.
Let us know if you need any help with the collection.
We'll all just withhold our school district taxes and we'll figure it all out.
We have friends.
Probably wouldn't take very long in this room. We could come pretty close to collecting what we need to. Sorry.
Any other, anything else about the financial reports?
Just about the LST tax, what's there an outlook on that because of people not being back and?
Well, I mean, the way I'm understanding it, I believe it's being interpreted by the state is even if you're working from home, if you have had an office at a location, you would be paying LST tax to that municipality. Where I think it's a question that's going to become more difficult is on new places that would say, well, you know, in moving here, we made a decision that people are working from home. I don't know that we can go back and say your entire payroll that's out of this office has to be that. I mean, we're kind of, I mean, obviously from the auditor side, I don't know what you're seeing, but I think that's going to be a question going forward. Nobody really had thought through this, you know, because before COVID, this wasn't, people went into the office and if somebody worked from home, they probably always worked from home and it wasn't a big deal. But this is a different thing. And then the question comes, if people are working from home, do we consider saying, as you're working from home, you pay LST tax in the community? And then how do we figure that out? I mean, I don't know what that answer is. You know, I mean,
That's going to show up eventually because these municipalities are going to be looking, not us, everybody's going to be looking for cash.
Yep.
And they're going to be, you know, especially a place like Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So, you know, that is going to become an issue for people.
Yeah.
And it's really a ghost office if you think about it.
Yeah.
I don't work from home. I work from the local Starbucks.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to have stuff like that going on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know the answer today. And I anticipate that we're going to see a slight drop. We're not, you know, I mean, and what we're having a hard time telling is the number down because, you know, we know we've had several companies close in town, or at least, you know, they pulled back, you know, or is it down because, you know, like I do believe like some of the numbers we're looking at, we're getting it like people are in the office in some situations. I know that. But there are a couple that I'm starting to wonder. And we'll be working with the folks that do our collections to really do some comparisons. You know, just the good news, LST tax, they're much more willing to talk about the data when you do earned income taxes. These collection groups don't necessarily want to share the data very specifically because it tells, if I see what you pay, I all of a sudden know what you make. LST tax doesn't tell me that, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so there's all of this protection of people's information, and I get it, you know, but from this side, we're trying to make projections and do things, and it's a little bit harder when,
You know, you almost wonder, it's like my Planet Fitness membership, which for $10 a month, I kept, even though I couldn't go there for 6 or 9 months.
sure,
You wonder if a lot of companies are doing that in a way.
yes,
Saying, you know what, it's not that much money. Let's keep on doing what we've been doing and we'll figure it out when it comes along.
yeah. I think we're going to see the pushback eventually is from the person that has totally converted from being in the office to now the office decision has been made that you're going to work from home.
Yeah.
Why am I paying $52 a year to Newtown Square when I live in Upper Providence or live in.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a realistic situation, and you know, we have to look at our exposure and realize, okay, this is going to be different.
Yeah, and it's just hard, it's really hard to measure it though.
Yeah,
You know,
sure.
I don't know what I'm measuring it against. You know,
Until you see the reality show.
until we see the reality show.
Yeah, and it's also another one that I've reached out to. They give us a quarterly report, not in the friendliest format as well. That's a much bigger report than the transfer tax. It would just be a lot of manual entry because we can't get it to convert into something that we can compare apples to apples to very easily.
The other challenge that opens up when people start trying to say they work from home and that's like their primary work location is they're not licensed there. Like you need a use and occupancy, at least by state law, to take a deduction for that, you do.
Yeah,
So you run into this other world of,
yeah. I mean, if the person like my wife's working from home probably right now 90% of the time. I mean, that's what they have. And my guess is going forward, she'll be at least 75% based on what we're hearing. So, but, you know, our perspective as a township, it's only an issue if you're running a business out of your home versus somebody just working. You know, if you're working from home, it's like, we don't view that as any different than me going home tonight and getting on the computer and answering emails and taking care of that kind of thing. But it is going to become a question. You know, if that becomes the primary and we have this drop in income, is there a way to say, yes, if you're working from home, that's your primary location. We are not going to require a use and occupancy change because that's
too
it.
much.
Well, and I don't think I don't think our code would allow for that is where we are. I understand if it's your primary business location, that's a different story. If you're going to try to write off your office, that's a different story,
Right.
you know, but this is a whole new world that we've entered into. And
Yeah, and I guess the other thing too is people, there's one thing if you're an accountant or a lawyer, you're working from home and that's the way you do things. But if you have a 4-person widget business
right.
that you not necessarily even make the widgets there, but you distribute them out of there or you run it like an eBay type, that's a whole different type of thing.
Exactly. And we look at that when
Yeah.
we're talking about, is it an impact business or a no impact business?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what does that look like? Like I said, somebody like my wife who's, you know, doing nothing, the neighbors don't even know she's there.
Yep.
You know, that's not, huh?
I phrase that these are recorded.
I understand that.
Your wife's doing nothing. Sorry, Kim, what you meant to say was.
But what I mean, you know, I mean, like, there's not
The impact.
deliveries being made, there's not all those things. We look at all of those things to determine, is there a business being run out of the house or is there not? That's how we make a decision whether you need a use and occupancy for a home business and what the impact is.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to use something similar. The thing is, in this area with LST tax, what happens? And, you know, what goes down on this?
Although actually, if we start to levy a tax on every time someone gets an Amazon delivery, this will be the most, my cul-de-sac alone will fund this township for the next 10 years.
It's not a bad idea.
I'm going to be careful what I say because this is being recorded.
Oh, no,
My house.
Not this-
But it's not Kim, I will say that.
Anything else? All right, may I have a motion to approve and consider, present the monthly reports to the Board of Supervisors?
Second,
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved, so presented. The next item on new business comes from me. So a month or two ago, probably 2 months ago, we had I like to refer to it as a meeting of the families here at the Township Building, where we had all the different committees and groups that support. What, get that reference on it?
I got it. That now can realize.
There are no baseball bats allowed in the building. So we had a session, and it's pretty interesting hearing what all these different groups are doing, including some of the scheduling challenges that arose from it. But as we were talking about things, and you guys were great, you handed us a bunch of materials, I looked at the strategic plan. And the strategic plan as an endeavor was a great thing. community members together, and you had working groups, and a lot of good things to put together a game, which gave everybody a good focus. So as I saw that and doing what we do here, I started thinking a little bit that we need a better connection between the strategic plan and the operating budget. And the reason I say that is twofold. One is what I like about our strategic plan is that it gave us and I should preface this with, I kind of do this for a living, part of what I've done forever. But it gave the community an understanding and a view of all the things that we're getting. As a strategic planner, if you're going to give me that title, it's way too broad. It's just the nature of it. But again, it's our first shot. We got into it, and over time we'll focus it. But the way I see it, though, is that if we don't tie that to our budgeting and reporting processes, we're hurting ourselves in the long run. Because one, we're not measuring these different initiatives. And second of all, over time, as I said, when you have an overly broad one, you're burning a lot of energy, doing a lot of different things that could be redirected to things that are, I'm not going to say more important, but can have more impact. Now, there's a number of different ways to do this. And the reason why I'm bringing it up here is for us to discuss it and then talk to the supervisors to see if they'd like to have an approach to it. But I don't know how familiar you folks are with things like balanced scorecards. Right? Balanced scorecards are a way for organizations to tie their strategy all the way down to effectively their P&L. And as an example of it, and we talked about golf before, so we'll use that quickly. So everything has a goal or an objective, and it has strategies and it has tactical stuff to it. So if you want to be a scratch golfer, okay, you don't just say, I'm going to go be a scratch golfer, and then you figure out a way. Done. You have a game plan behind that. You have a bunch of strategies behind that say, I'm going to practice 7 times a week. I'm going to take lessons. I'm going to play twice a week. Then you do all those things. So when you do strategic planning effectively, you do that for each one of your strategic planning goals or initiatives. You lay it out, and then you go ahead and say, how do I keep score? Literally. So in golf, you literally keep score. Let's say you put your results on a spreadsheet. You see how you do at the end. So in the case of a balanced scorecard, you do something similar to that with your strategic planning initiatives. So you can effectively keep score about how we're doing against each of those goals. And the key to it is to have a quantifiable measurement to it. Otherwise, it becomes a feel-good thing. Hey, isn't it great that we did X? What did it really mean? What impact did it have? And should we continue doing it based on that? Is that everybody fundamentally get what I'm saying? Anybody have any agita with that? I think it's a bad idea for us to look at something like that, consider doing it, and figure out the way to apply it here.
If I can, I would only say that from our perspective, Rich and I have actually spent a lot of time on that the last 3 months, looking at that whole issue for a couple of reasons. One is, we're very excited that we've been able to get the budget award for the last couple of years, but we know that the area that we've scored poorly in on that is that very issue, is having performance measures, tying back to those performance measures. How does that meet where we're headed with our strategic plan, all of those kind of things. Now, partly, we really didn't even have a strategic plan until last year. So
Exactly.
exactly.
This is all new.
It's all new.
And I'm not saying this is a massive hole.
Yeah.
I think it's an evolutionary thing.
Yeah, I agree. And we're trying to figure out, and we've been really working at this to say, how do we get to where we want to be with the budget award piece and do what we need to do, but also make it make sense for Newtown, not just go do it just to say, oh, we've done it, but have it really mean something. So this is exactly the conversation we're having with you, and that's one of the reasons why we added in the term program program budgeting into that, is because that's one of the things they're looking for as part of this discussion. So we wanted to be able to broaden the discussion a little bit. Let me just kind of tell you where we are, and then we're open to any assistance to help us kind of get there. So we've been very used to presenting the budget one way for the last 6 years. And so we kind of have been doing that this year, as we've done that, we presented the capital, we presented the personnel, we presented the operating, we put everything together, and we're about ready to do that to the board. But looking at what we're trying to do for going forward and what needs to be done for the budget award, one of the things that we started on probably about a month ago was saying, here's our strategic plan. We talked about the strategic plan. The board met back in May and said, we went right through every strategic plan initiative and hopeful outcome and said, what is it that we're going to do in 2022 to move us from here to there, right? And so we came up with a list of about 40 different items, and we went back and made sure that we came up with how we were going to finance those 40 items between now and in 2022. And 39, I'm sorry.
No, the trolley,
Huh?
the trolley.
Oh, yeah, that's the trolley. John
figure out how-
Nahn said he wanted to run a trolley down the middle of Westchester Pike. We're not worried about that one. That's a very long-term.
Couldn't figure out how to fund that one.
So anyway, he told us a big thing. Yeah, and John did. And so,
Zip line.
yeah, that's a good idea. Anyway, so we started that process, and then we came back and we said, so how are we how do people see what we're doing in the budget to that? So then what we asked everyone to do was take their budget and say, what percentage of their budget goes to each one of the outcomes that are in our strategic plan? And the goal, obviously the goal would be that 100% of our budget's going to one of those outcomes. That's probably not reality, but that's what the ultimate goal would be in the future, would be where we're headed. And we looked at that and said, that's great, except for that really didn't tie back to what the GFOA was, the Government Financial Officers Association budget program was looking at. They were wanting to see some programs that we were doing that were specific. So looking at things like snow removal and what are your performance measures? What are the goals, and how are you doing that? And for different programs. So we're now in the process. Rich created this great spreadsheet that basically there's 18 outcomes from our strategic plan. And Rich said, okay, every account has to be allocated to somewhere in there, or it has some percentage that's not allocated because it's, we have some things that it just doesn't fit. And so we're working through that, but now we're also in the process going back and saying, what about the programs that we're doing that are actually very specific in trying to achieve some of those? And can we tie those back very specifically of all the dollars? Because typically we don't budget by program, we budget by category. We budget by personnel, but we don't necessarily tie our personnel cost back to snow removal other than our overtime. Right? Because I'm going to pay the guys' salaries, whether they're working snow removal or whether they're sweeping a street or whatever. We're gonna pay them every 2 weeks, and so that part's kind of set. As long as they work 40 hours, we pay them 40 hours, right?
Yeah.
So
If I can interrupt though, that's a fine way to look at it from a budgeting perspective,
right,
but it's not the outcome perspective.
it's not the
That-
outcome perspective.
That's the key thing.
That's the
Yeah.
change that we're trying to make. And so, so anyway, we're looking at how to pull that together to say, are we achieving the outcome and what's it costing us to achieve that?
Wait, didn't you do that at the budget workshop that I came to? If I recall, you had the slides up showing what you went through the strategic plan. and
Yep.
You said, here's what we're doing to meet that
Yep.
budget wise. So now I'm missing, I thought you made that
We
connection.
need to quantify a performance measure
With it.
within that is what the GFOA is asking for. And part of the, I don't want to say problem, but why we're kind of brainstorming for so long, don't have a formalized plan, is there's no real guidance from the GFOA. I know Steve sat in on something at the ICMA conference, but I sat in on a 2-day training called Performance Measures and Budget Monitoring, and
Too soft.
way too, it's,
And that's generally what happens.
Yeah.
Because it says, okay, we want to clean the streets from snow. great, check that box.
Yeah.
But how do you really measure that?
Yeah,
You know,
Yeah.
and, you know, and I think maybe, you know, I want to be conscious of our time. Was your, Alex, was your question answered? I don't want to jump in before we got a chance.
No, it was answered. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if the issue is just simply quantifying each one. and
Yeah.
I think the
specifically coming up
quantification
with
is the
a-
biggest issue.
Some
a
stuff
measure
you
of
can't.
success.
Yeah, some stuff you can't,
Right.
right? For example, do you make payroll? Yes or no? If there's things like that, but and this is one of those examples where I think you can steal from private industry
Mhm.
and see how they do that. And I'd be happy, Rich, if you want, we could sit down and I could show you examples how you can do this.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think it would be, and I'll follow up if you don't want. I think it's what I really think it does, it enables you and the supervisors to present to the community, not only a strategy, okay, but here's how we're measuring it, and here's how we have no lack of accountability. We're very accountable in the township. We're very visible in what we do. I just think it would be great if we could sit there and show them these 20 things, and here's how we're doing, trying to achieve them.
Yep.
So,
And we agree, we're
Yeah,
totally
and
on
I just
board.
think, I just saw it and heard it and said, you know, there's got to be a way we can do this. And what I like about balanced scorecards, we all fundamentally understand what they are, because everybody who's kept score on any given moment, that they do. So it's something. So I'll catch up. Leonard's the only one who's not accountable. Other than the dog.
But Jim, if we go through this process of quantifying, for instance, I'll just use your example of snow removal. What does that get us? I mean, we have snow removal or we don't, and it's done or it's not. And are we spinning our wheels too much on
You're
something
right.
like
Sometimes
that?
it's a yes or a no.
Okay.
You know, and it's that simple. And again, from where I'll go back to the golf example. If you can't say you want to be a scratch handicap, right? Two things. One, should you be measuring it? Because again, some things are just not measurable. But the other thing you ask yourself, the second question is, well, why is this a strategic initiative? Because there's a difference between strategic initiatives and the care and feeding of the township. You know, for example, you know, if I'm the electric company, right? Does everybody have power today? Yes. Are we at 95%, 98%, 97%? That's a different measure. Right? So you know, from a snow removal thing, it may be within 24 hours of a snowfall more than 1 inch, you know, what percentage of the streets are cleared?
Mhm.
And our goal may be 100%. Well, did we reach that 100%? And again, that's maybe a really bad example because it's overly operating. But if you're looking at strategic things, because we may be putting out strategic goals in that plan, that a year later we said to ourselves, stupid. You know, why did we do X when we can't come anywhere near achieving X? You know, or you know, we should have done Y because look at the need for Y. And that's really what it does, because once you start keeping score, you say to yourself, "Man, we stink at that." You know, and sometimes, by the way, it could be customer satisfaction stuff.
Yeah.
So you're right. You don't want to make the hill too big to climb, but at the same time, I think from when you're talking about, you know, transparency to the community, I think that the community, you know, say, holy crap, these guys are really accomplishing a lot. Really, it's a way, frankly, for you guys to point out how well you get some stuff done.
And how well the money is spent. At the end of the day, that's what they want to know. What did you spend the money on and how well did you do in that particular round?
But one of the things with snow removal, and we don't look at this, is because we have a goal of clearing the snow. We say, we don't care what it costs. We're going to have all of our people removing snow. And you go back, and is the difference between 24 hours to have all the roads clear and 30 hours, was it worth the overtime that you just paid to have everybody working nonstop? And I don't even know if that's such a de minimis number, but that's the type of
It's that
performance
kind of
measure.
measurement, yeah. And really what you can get very diagnostic with it. Now, I'll give you an example on the business side, right? And because part of the problem you get into is you guys do your job, and your job is to make sure that donuts are made every morning, and at the end of the day, the store is clean. You do a really, really good job of it. The supervisors sit there and they receive this information saying, oh, budget's in place, we're doing a good job against budget, and we need to start planning for next year kind of thing. All of which you need to do, because I'd be foolish to sit there and say it's no big deal, but there's so much beyond just, as you know, making sure you make your budget and you execute on your budget. And the ability to see it, and again, I'll go back to the strategic plan. It's awesome that we put one together. It's too broad and it's not measured. So until you make it measurable, then you can't, it's my opinion is too broad. Once you start measuring, you're going to say to yourself, you know what, 30% of what we put out here, we really need to cut that back because you do have limited resources.
And it does, I do think it helps you prioritize.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, we're going to have a very difficult conversation with the board coming up. I'm just going to, Leonard left, I'll say it.
I was just about to say that.
The mic's on.
Cut. No. But I mean, you know, within the last 24 hours,
Yes.
and I mean, since Friday, well, since Monday, right?
Yeah.
Since Monday morning. As we started pulling, we got some bids in for some of the things that we put out, RFPs. We've had, and we made a few changes to the budget, we've had almost a $400,000 increase in the budget in 24 hours. And I'm sitting here sweating that out, to be honest with you, about how what we're gonna do between now and Monday in presenting that to our board for a way of how we're gonna accomplish this, because it's some of those, one of those items, I don't have a choice. It's legally required that we do. And it went up $200,000. And so we're sitting here saying, okay, how do we address this? How do we fund this going forward in a budget that we were sitting here going, in October, we're really about as close as we've ever been to making this budget be a balanced budget, ready to go and feeling pretty good.
That's
And
the
now
better
we're
stuff in
sitting,
October.
now we're sitting here really on our side and we're saying, okay, we've got some real homework to do, figuring this out. And it now is going to be setting priorities. Up till now, it was, we're really going to go accomplish everything that we talked about. And now we're having to come back and say, we're going to have to do this a little differently.
You know, it's really interesting, and we talked about this before. You know, this is an apolitical group.
Yeah.
And I can say this, and I'll say it in front of Leonard and the supervisors. The political approach of not raising taxes is a foolish long-term endeavor, because in an environment where you have costs, not raising taxes is it's a dangerous thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're in an inflationary environment. No one's going to question that. You're also in an environment where, depending on what you're selling, the term inflation is minimal. It's stagflation, and it's hyperinflation in a lot of places, especially when you're talking about fuel and other things that are going on. So because we've been in an environment where we haven't been able to raise taxes because of political influences, now all of a sudden you're looking at $400,000 bad guys in not that big of a budget.
Yeah.
And you're I'm not going to say you're hosed, but you're really challenged by it.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's, you know, if we ever have the revenue conversation among this, it's a hard conversation to have. Politicians don't want to hear it, especially people at county levels who think that you can keep your taxes low, people are going to want to live there. You get the services, that's what they want to live. This is an example where you're in a spot and you don't have control over whether taxes are raised in this town. But because of our weak revenue stance, this is the kind of stuff that impacts us.
Yeah.
And when you're only depending on good guys to start happening, like transfer taxes and permits, because you have a lot of development going on, all of a sudden you're in a hyperinflationary environment. And I'm getting way too economic profession. That's where we're stuck. It's not like you can go out and say, hey, let's go out and find 400 grand to offset that. And that happens like this.
It's not like we sell a widget and I can say, how do I sell more widgets?
Exactly.
I'm just going to raise my price.
Huh?
I'm just going to raise my
Exactly.
price.
Yes, because we don't raise prices.
Right. So
But
that's
we-
what the issue is.
We did talk about in the capital budget project task force about the stormwater change,
Yeah.
but I guess that's still in discussion.
Well, we're still waiting. Hopefully we're going to hear in the next
No more surprises.
24 hours, another major surprise number that we've been talking about that we knew we had to
Yeah.
add and where we thought we were going to take that from. So,
Well, you know, a good example, I don't know if you guys heard the stories, but people who are building houses, right? You're building a house, you talk to a builder, it's gonna cost you, $100. Right? He calls you tomorrow and says, the lumber just went up 75%.
Sure.
Calls you next week, it just went up 150%. He calls you the week after that and says it's back to the price it used to be.
yeah.
That's where everybody's stuck right now because of all these supply chain challenges we have. And I'm hoping this is the case, but with some of your suppliers, that's a moment in time price.
My concern is because in this particular issue, it's heavily labor intensive. We are experiencing a shortage of laborers.
Sure.
And because we're experiencing the shortage of laborers, I don't know how temporary it is.
Yeah.
I mean, projections, some people you talk to say this is a 6-month issue. Some people you talk to, this is years down the road before it's going to be corrected because just to give you an example, my understanding is, and we hear this from some of our guys who are working in the Public Works Department, and in comparison to other towns, we pay pretty well there. That's one of those areas that we're probably at least a little ahead of the curve in what other municipalities are doing. And may I say, I believe they earn every penny we pay them. They're an excellent, I tell people all the time, I think they're the best public works department I know of. And other towns tell me they think we have the best public.
Especially since they have to work for you.
Yeah, really. There's a lot of truth to that.
Right, Rich?
But what I will say is, I'm hearing them talk about something I've never heard them talk about. I can go drive a school bus, get a $10,000 bonus, sign-on bonus today, and I will be making almost as much as I'm making right now. And that's after the $10,000 signing bonus. I'm having the question, what are we going to do to keep our team here so that I can't find a person to apply. I want a janitor in the building. I can't find a person to apply. This is the kind of thing that we're looking at, and if I go to pay a third party to do what we need done, it's not affordable.
Well, and it's interesting too, and I understand the blue collar aspect of it. It's white collar jobs too.
Oh, absolutely.
Jobs that people can't, I'll give you a unique factor, golf clubs, right? Golf pro, 2 assistant pros, they can't find people who want to be assistant golf pros anymore. Right? And they're getting them from retired people coming back and working part-time to get to fill the gap, right? There's all these damn old people. But it's so interesting how the labor disconnect is there. I worked in that world for about 30 years. We got a million conversations about it. It's not a moment in time thing because the number of retirees.
It's the demographics.
Exactly. And
It is.
people don't realize that. And, those hard jobs, which is why if you walk into a restaurant, they say it's going to be an hour to be seated because we can't find anybody to work in the kitchen or we'll wait to tables.
Yep.
So I understand your point.
But Steve,
So I just say that
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a moment in time, and that's my
No,
concern.
I get it. Okay.
Go ahead.
there's a difference between the janitor example and the public works example, because you haven't had anybody leave from public works yet, right? But you're trying to get somebody in to be a janitor, so you can raise the salary on the janitor, right? You could offer more money and you would get an applicant.
Potentially, and the question, and yes, the
Raise
answer
it
is.
high enough and I'll apply. I'm
Okay.
applying.
And I guess the question is, yes, so that is the case. But, let's just say that I need to pay $25 an hour to get a janitor and to come in and do that. Now, all of a sudden, I've got a public works employee saying, why am I getting paid just about that same amount to do a lot more responsibility, because every time I get behind the wheel of the truck, I have a liability that janitor doesn't have. And so now have I just, every place, have I just increased everything? And then it goes through the whole organization.
Maybe, but wages are going up, everywhere, and, we got it as a
Back to the
community, we got.
Raising the price,
Back to the point. I mean,
raise the price.
we
That's the
can't-
problem,
I mean-
raising the prices.
Well,
People
and,
don't understand that. That's where you're gonna wind up being.
well, and, we look back, we said we've raised taxes 6% in 5 years. Is that, I think was what we.
I don't remember the exact number, but it's about that.
But I think that's what we shared. We raised taxes roughly 6%, equal with a little bit behind what inflation was
It's
during
about
that period of
7%,
time.
if I remember.
Inflation was about 7.3. We raised taxes about 6.2 or 6.4, something like that during that same time. During that same time, every year, the police increase in wages has been 3% or greater, because it's contractual. It's 3% or greater. The non-uniform, we've tied kind of to whatever the inflation rate was. We've just tried to do that. This year, we're having the conversation, how do I tie it to inflation? And if I do tie it to inflation, do I tell people we're ready to give an employee in the township a 5%, 6% raise this year? And, but somehow I'm supposed to do that. And we're supposed to go into the board and say, we don't want to raise taxes. I don't know how
No, you're right.
you,
Well, you've
how do
squeezed
you
the
keep,
productivity out, so you hit a certain point where you can't squeeze anymore.
yeah.
Nothing left.
And we're gonna be quoted that, because you're right, it's one thing when you're managing salaries,
Mhm.
okay? But when you start talking about hard costs from third parties that you can't manage, you have to pay those bills.
Yep.
I got a pizza last night that was $17 last year. It was $21 yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty good pizza, but I know exactly what he's dealing with, because he's dealing with his costs. And again, it's all variable costs in this case. His rent hasn't gone up. His labor cost may have gone up a little bit, but not that much, but it's all the variable cost of the materials.
Yeah.
So when we talk, again, I'll go back to your point, you need to raise the prices. And this is a much bigger conversation, and it came up in a new business item, but it's something we absolutely, and I know you know that, hopefully your board understands that.
Yeah, it's just tough, I get the pressure from the community. The community's feeling the pinch, right? Everyone's feeling that pressure of the
Well, they're
raising.
seeing it across the board, everything they buy.
Yeah, anybody who's
they're seeing
paying
it.
attention.
Correct. Oh, no, everybody is paying attention. They're seeing it.
Yeah, but the question is, will the politicians let you do it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
the
know,
the
township's
other
not
thing-
immune to those costs.
What's that?
I said the township's not immune to those costs
Exactly.
either, than
That's
everyone else's
correct.
labor and
The
materials.
fuel costs alone for the police have got to be, it's got to be an astronomical.
Oh, now, yeah.
Well, the good
And
news,
public
the
works
good
truck,
news
yeah.
is the contract was signed by the school district. We piggyback off the school districts.
Oh, great, so you have a forward buy there.
We have yeah.
Yeah.
So the good news for that one, it's actually one of those things that I can manage relatively well. We know what it is when we, it's, the problem is it changes in July, right? The
Yeah,
school
so,
district,
yeah, heads up. Right.
so I just have to be kind of watching and saying, what do we think July is going to happen? And so we'll budget this much for this part of the year and that much for the next part. The thing that's killing us though, really, when you go back to it, is a lot of our capital projects, the cost of materials is just, we have an estimate that it's going to cost this, and then we go out and bid it, and it's like twice that amount. And when we get the bid back, I was like,
You remember a couple of years ago with salt?
Yeah.
Salt prices
Yeah,
went up like 10
right.
times over the course of a winter.
Yeah.
It's a demand-driven thing, and everybody's taking advantage of it. Right?
exactly that. So it's in a time like this, we're spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to make this work.
So-
One
sorry.
comment on the wages, sorry, is just that inflation has been very odd over the last, let's say, 5-year period, because there have been years within that where inflation was actually negative.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a way to look at it as a rolling average at this point, because when I see the inflation now and I look back over the 5-year period, I feel like some of it is a catch up.
Mhm.
And I'm not so sure how many employers or townships in that year of negative inflation did not give raises.
Well, I will tell you, we didn't, I don't think we had a year that we did nothing.
No.
But I've had years where we've done 1%. And so, since I've been here, we've had a couple of those years. So particularly over the last 5, it's been, we tie it to the
Southeastern
southeastern
Pennsylvania.
or not Pennsylvania, but eastern area
The index.
index. That's what we use. We use it consistently. And, you know, that way I feel like we're using something. Obviously, we don't take money away, but in that index, it's never been zero. It's always been an amount, but it is an issue. And I understand what you're saying. It is
Social Security
balanced.
would not be putting through the increase. They thought this was a temporary phenomenon. Take all the
Yeah.
politics out of it.
Yeah.
They would not bind themselves to something like this. What this is going to be. They just don't want.
Good point.
And it's interesting, if you look at, you know, the last time there was a inflationary time as high as this was in 08, 09. And again, it was still, a lot of it was stimulus driven, which is what part of it it's meant to do. And then you saw it dramatically fall off the cliff.
Right.
But it still took 16 to 18 months to play itself out. And it's interesting, if you think back to that time, anybody remember inflation being 6 or 7% back then? I don't. So it's, to Lisa's point, it plays itself out over 5 and 6 year periods. But that doesn't feel good when you're sitting in this environment right now.
It's not
Doesn't
good
matter
in
if
the
the
year
5 or
that
6
it
years.
triples.
Yeah, exactly, right. All right, so the follow-up, Rich, you and I will connect and we'll talk about that.
Sounds good.
Last item on our agenda, some slacker wants to cancel our December 15th meeting.
Yeah, so let me talk about that since I'm the slacker.
Well, before we
Okay.
do that, I was wondering, do we need to do anything update wise in terms of capital, in terms of where our little project?
I just realized that we haven't met for a while, so I'll get with you two.
Okay.
We'll get something on the books and we'll.
Okay.
So I'll just say this, we're expecting a number back from Eileen within the next couple days to understand where we are with stormwater. And that's what we're kind of waiting on. And as soon as we get that, then we'll be prepared to take the next
If we
step.
survive the initial shock, we will.
Yeah,
we'll-
once we
we'll-
get one.
We'll reach out.
So-
You said what?
So the December meeting, let me kind of explain. I met with the board. One of the things that we are planning for this December is to recarpet the library. And so we've been talking about that and we looked at options. And one option was to move all the books out of the building, put them in trailers and do that. Or the other option was to put all the books in this room.
Sure.
And that was obviously the cheaper item. It was $5,000 in moving expenses that we saved. But in it, where we really saved is I wasn't renting trailers at $5,000.
And logistically, it's such an easier thing to do.
It's such an easier thing to do. So what we're asking from the committees, obviously the Board of Supervisors still has an obligation to meet. It's it's township
Yeah.
law. We have to meet at least one time. Plus I've got to pass the budget. So, because that's another law.
Yes.
And we're hoping to do it on the first meeting in December. But so we're looking at asking committees that unless there's something that's very pressing, is there a reason for you to meet in December? And would you consider canceling it? If you feel like we need to meet, we will go ahead and try to schedule it. My guess is it will be someplace off-site. It will probably be either at the school district or we're thinking SAP right now, because I'm looking for a place that can record. There's other places that we could do it. It's just that I need to have the ability to have cameras and recording capability. And so that's the place.
So two things, and one, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
But number two, remember, we have technology to do stuff. So we don't, if we think it's important to meet, we could just meet online and allowing all the people to join in as well.
Yeah.
Need be.
If need be.
Right? So, but I don't think, unless the rest of you disagree with me, I have no issue with not having that meeting. We don't have burning platforms that much that we address.
Yeah.
So unless something like that occurs, I'm fine doing it. Anybody disagree?
I'll make a motion to cancel the December 15th, 2021 Finance Committee meeting.
Second,
Second.
no discussion? I heard. Go ahead.
All right.
Any old business? Any public comment? Anybody in the queue? Okay. Anybody have any items for the next agenda?
we'll probably have something for the
Capital update.
capital, but I hope maybe if you and Rich have met, we'll maybe be reporting back something on the strategic plan and that side as well.